Imagine a fighter plane so tough, so relentless in ground attack, that enemy pilots called it an unstoppable tank. Sounds like a sci-fi movie, right? But this was the terrifying reality for German aces facing the P-47 Thunderbolt. How did this American warbird earn such a fearsome, almost mythical reputation among its adversaries? June 26, 1943, near Forges-les-Hauts, France, 56th Fighter Group, 61st Fighter Squadron, Colonel Hubert Zemke in command, Major Francis S. Gabreski in command of the squadron. Late light lay thin over hedgerows and lanes. The bomber stream turned for home. The escorts rolled with it. Radios murmured and then sharpened. Through the upper haze came hard slashes of shadow and fire. Focke-Wulf 190s dropped out of cloud like thrown iron. The formation scattered. Tracers wrote straight cold lines across the sky. A thunderbolt at the rear took the first heavy burst and shuddered. The pilot was Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson. Impact ran through the fuselage like a hammer. Another burst struck. Then another. The windscreen fractured into a white net. The cockpit filled with the sharp smell of hot oil and powder. He tried the canopy. It did not move. He tried again with both hands. It stayed locked. The hydraulics were gone. The handle might as well have been welded to the rail. There was no way out. He would have to fly it. The Thunderbolt dipped and began to slide. He kicked rudder. The slide eased. The wings came level. The engine coughed once, twice, and then held a rough, stubborn rhythm. The big radial kept turning. Air-cooled cylinders bit air. The propeller still took a clean bite. The machine was wounded. The machine was alive. A Focke-Wulf moved in behind him. Close. Patient. The German did not spray. He measured the range. He fired long, deliberate bursts. 20mm cannon, machine gun. Impacts drove through tail and wings and fuselage. The Thunderbolt absorbed the blows with a brutal, grinding sound. Johnson sank lower, feeling for airspeed, feeling for any lift he could keep. Oil smeared across the glass until the world became smoke and blur. Another pass came. Holes opened in metal like punched paper. Control response grew heavy, then heavier. Yet the Thunderbolt kept its attitude. The Pratt Whitney R-2800 pulled even as it leaked and howled. He flew by touch. He read the horizon through vibration and the weight in the stick. The Focke-Wulf slid a beam for a moment. Canopy to canopy at arm's length across violent air. Two men looked across that short distance. The German waggled his wings once. He dropped back behind the Thunderbolt and tried again. More cannon, more hammering, then silence. The belts were empty. The German eased forward. A crisp salute, a clean peel away into the grey. The attack ended. Johnson was alone with a battered airplane, a jammed canopy, and the sea somewhere beyond the low rim of France. He set a course heading for England. Every mile felt like 10 miles. The engine laboured but held. The airframe creaked but answered. The cockpit was slick with oil. The slipstream clawed at broken perspex. He kept the Thunderbolt one breath above a stall because he could not afford one wasted knot. The coastline rose as a darker band under a hard, indifferent sky. Manston lay long and straight. He lined up shallow. The landing was a long fall, more than a flare. The gear stayed under him. The wheels bit and skated, and then took hold. The Thunderbolt rolled and at last came to a raw stop. Men ran, then slowed, then stared. They closed in and counted holes until counting lost meaning. Fingers disappeared into some of them. Edges were curled and sharp. Fabric hung in torn strips. Panels were bent back like tin. The canopy still would not move. They pried it with tools and hands and hauled him out. He stood on the tarmac with legs that trembled, face black with oil blood, a thin line at the edge of one eye. Word moved through dispersal huts in minutes. A Thunderbolt had taken a storm of cannon fire and flown home. It was not only luck. It was not a fluke. It was the weight and will of design armour behind a spine and chest. Air-cooled cylinders that did not bleed to death from a pinhole. Fuel tanks that sealed themselves when cut. Spars that stayed straight even when chewed. Elegance had been traded for endurance, and that trade had paid in the only currency that mattered. Across the Channel, the lesson travelled its own way. Luftwaffe pilots were not sentimental. They knew what centered bursts did to most fighters at normal convergence. They had watched machines shatter, burn, and spin. They had watched men go with them. The sight of a Thunderbolt taking long, steady fire and refusing to fold left a mark. It was calculation, not myth. It meant the next man who rolled in behind a Thunderbolt would remember how much ammunition the last man had spent. He would remember the moment when the belts ran dry and a salute replaced a kill. Back on the line, the name hardened. Jug. Not graceful. Not slender. A brawler. A survivor. Pilots began to plan with that toughness as a fact. Dive hard, accept a hit, finish the task. Trust the metal and the engine to bring you home. Confidence took root where it counted in the breath before the trigger squeeze, and in the long minutes after damage when a man needed the machine to forgive him and live. Evening moved down. Crewmen ran palms across torn skin and bent ribs and learned the battle by touch. Johnson sat quiet. He still tasted oil. He still heard those slow, steady bursts. He knew what the Thunderbolt had done. Everyone who touched the airplane knew it as well. A reputation began in that hour. One pilot, one injured machine, one enemy who emptied his guns and could not finish the kill. From that point forward, the men who faced the Thunderbolt carried a new thought into the fight. If it is a jug, and it is still turning, you have not yet hurt it enough. And if you linger to make sure 8 heavy guns will answer. Start at the nose, the great round face of the Pratt Whitney R-2800. Air-cooled. 13 feet of propeller disc biting thick air. A wall of metal that does not bleed when struck. There is no radiator to puncture. There is no coolant to pour away life. Put holes in a fin or in a cylinder, and the engine still breathes. It shakes. It leaks. It runs. Behind that cyclone of pistons sits structure built like a bridge. Deep spars, heavy ribs, skin that is not delicate, armor where a pilot's spine and chest live. Self-sealing tanks under and behind the seat layers that swell when hot fuel touches them. Wounds scab shut while the fight is still going. Fire tries to grow. The tank chokes it out. The pilot keeps flying. It is not a light airplane. Empty weight that would swallow some fighters whole. But mass here is a decision. Mass is momentum in a dive. Mass is reserve strength when cannon shells walk the length of a wing. The Thunderbolt trades ballet for tolerance of punishment, and tolerance of punishment is the currency that spends well at 200 yards in an enemy's gun sight. Air runs a long road through this machine. Ram air in through the intakes, intercooler ducts under the skin. A turbocharger in the back that catches exhaust energy turns it into boost and sends it forward again. A long armoured intestine of plumbing that looks fragile on a quiet blueprint and proves stubborn in dirty reality. You can chew one section, and the rest still feeds pressure. Redundancy by length, by routing, by sheer overbuild. 850 caliber Browning guns give the airplane its blunt instrument soul, 4 in each wing. Thousands of rounds on board, harmonized to flood a cone of space that an enemy must cross if he wants the kill. The guns do not only punch, they saturate. A good burst from a jug erases the margin for a pilot who stays too long on a wounded target. That changes behavior. The enemy learns to make one pass and break. The Thunderbolt pilot learns to accept a hit and keep firing back. Control runs are simple and strong and honest. Cables and pulleys. Large surfaces that talk through the stick with a steady hand, even when holes turn an aileron's edge ragged. Hydraulics help where needed, and there are emergency paths that let a pilot nurse crippled systems home. A belly landing that would fold a thinner fighter often ends with a jug sliding and grinding and then sitting upright, the canopy still clear, the pilot still breathing. Crew chiefs jack it, patch it, and send it again. Survivability is not only the life of a pilot, it is the next sortie on the board. Point the nose down and the airplane becomes a different creature. From high, cover the speed piles on 500 miles per hour in a steep dive, a trembling edge near compressibility. Early pilots learned the limits the hard way, then wrote the book so others did not have to. Cowl flaps set, rudder trim forward, ease out in thicker air. The airframe takes those brutal transitions and comes back straight. Few machines in that war could dive away like a jug and still be expected on the line at dawn. The cockpit is a cocoon built by people who expected shrapnel. A thick windscreen, head armor, plate that stops what would have ended a man in many other fighters. It is not invincible, nothing in that sky was, but it is forgiving. When a pilot makes a small mistake, the machine offers a second chance. When the enemy makes a small mistake, 8 heavy guns make sure he does not get another. German pilots noticed because they had to. They watched cannon shells strike and strike again and saw the Thunderbolt hold attitude and muscle through the shock. They learned to fear the dive, the zoom, the moment when the big fighter, apparently mortally hit, refused to spin and instead leveled and bit back. Reports spoke of American fighters that were hard to destroy. That is not romance. That is gunnery mathematics meeting metallurgy. Tactics grew from the metal. Units leaned into altitude and dive. They leaned into slashing hits. They leaned into ground attack where armor and tankage turned risk into acceptable risk. Low over hedgerows, anti-aircraft fire lit the air like a furnace door, and still the Thunderbolt came back with holes you could fit a hand through. Crews smeared dope over patches, riveted new skins, replaced a cylinder or two, bled lines, refilled ammunition bays, and signed the form. First launch at first light, last recovery near dusk. Design became tempo. The airplane's size hid advantages in plain sight. A big wing meant room for guns and fuel, and the strength that lets a pilot pull hard in a recovery without watching a spar complain itself into a fold. A big fuselage meant space to route air and heat and boost away from a single fragile point of failure. A big engine meant spare horsepower to carry armor and ammunition and bombs and rockets and still climb to meet a threat. Not elegant but exact to purpose, in a war where the winner is the machine that completes the task and returns to the roster. This is why the Jug would not die. Not because of legend, because of choices made at the drawing board and proven in the ugliest seconds of combat. A radial that tolerates wounds, fuel that heals itself, bones that do not snap, guns that answer pain with greater pain, systems that fall back with grace when hurt. The result is a fighter that lets its pilot finish the minute he is in and live to fly the next one. High above the North Sea, the plan looked clean. Climb to the bombers, take station, keep the wolves off. The Thunderbolt was built for altitude and for speed in a dive, so the first months were about spacing and radios and timing, and the simple terror of watching contrails converge. Spring of 1943 into early 1944, the Jug learned the job the hard way. Escort out, peel and pounce, zoom back up before the next enemy squadron arrived, hits and misses. Names chalked on boards. Lessons written in aluminum and oil. Range was the enemy. Fuel clocks ran faster than watches. The bomber stream pushed deeper and then deeper still. The Thunderbolt could not always stay to the target and back. Crews worked the problem with drop tanks and careful throttle, but physics drew a hard line. When longer-ranged fighters began to arrive, the balance shifted. The Mustang took the distant guard. The Jug kept its high perch and claws, but a new truth rose from the fields. There was another war just above the hedgerows. The first time a Thunderbolt dropped through torn cloud levelled at mast height and stitched a road full of trucks, something clicked. The airplane that could swallow damage at 20,000 feet could also live in the furnace of low flak. Armour mattered. Self-sealing tanks mattered. Redundant paths for air and fuel and control mattered. The Jug could take hits and still lift out of a valley on a single cough of power. That meant you could send it again tomorrow. Tactics rewrote themselves. Fighter groups leaned into fighter bomber work. Controllers learned the cadence for directing steel when only seconds remained. Crews hung 500-pound bombs under wing, sometimes a pair, sometimes more, and added rockets when a bridge or a rail cut demanded a harder punch. Pilots refined the rhythm, a shallow glide at speed release at the right second, then nose down for guns. 850 caliber Brownings walked a bright, ruinous line across convoys and flak pits and parked locomotives. Traffic stopped. Commanders shouted into telephones. Schedules dissolved like smoke. Normandy made method into doctrine. The bocage turned fields into rooms and roads into funnels. Artillery called for air. Columns tried to slip forward under hedgerow cover. The Jug answered. Sortie after sortie, dawn to last light, it burned gaps into the enemy day. Bridges behind the front vanished. Ammunition trucks that would have fed a counterattack flared at crossroads. Strongpoint took a pair of bombs, then 2 strafing passes that kept every head down while infantry closed. The sky over the lodgement became a slow, grinding factory of disruption, and the Jug was one of its heaviest machines. Airfields pulsed to a new tempo. Land, rearm, refuel, patch holes, launch. Ground crews moved like pit teams, hands black with cordite and hydraulic oil faces set, and tired eyes on the sortie count. The airplane cooperated. Belly scrapes mended. Shot control runs were replaced in short order. A cylinder swap brought the big radial back to full song. Survivability flowed into availability, availability into pressure, pressure into movement on the map. By late summer, the fighter-bomber dance was muscle memory. Armies signaled from half-hidden fields. Controllers vectored flights to grid squares. Pilots learned the trench-level view of towns and ridgelines they had once known only as marks on paper. The Jug became a voice you could call a presence that broke the spell of a stalled advance. When weather opened, a slit flights knifed through to wreck a column that had dared to bunch on a road. When fog sat low, pilots held at treetop, rolling left and right to read the ground like a script. Autumn and winter did not change the logic. In the fights for river lines and crossing towns, Thunderbolts made every ferry risky, and every bridge repair a race against the next whistle of descending metal. In cold forests, when the front bent and armour surged, any hour of clear sky became a hunt. Columns that moved by day paid. Columns that waited by night found that dawn brought the same punishment. The Jug's reach was shorter than the deep escort machines, but for battles that hinged on a few dozen miles of road, it was exactly the right length. Something else shifted. Pilot confidence hardened into method. You could run low under a cloud deck, take a nick, feel the engine cough, and still trust the airplane to bring you to a strip of pierced steel mat somewhere behind the line. That trust widened the margin of daring. On the other side of the gun sight, the same arithmetic worked in reverse. If word spread that Jugs were up, drivers scattered, officers hesitated, pace fell apart. Operations on the big map began to reflect the daily certainty that some roads were now a very bad idea. The Thunderbolt did not stop being a fighter. It could still rise and dive and kill an opponent who misjudged closure. But its legend settled where the flak was thick and the work was dirty rail yards, bridges, convoys, hedgerow corners, factory yards just beyond a town's last row of houses. An airplane first sent to guard a line of contrails ended by owning the space where dust and smoke live. It was not a reassignment by committee. It was combat finding the right tool and using it until the job bent. The Jug that once shepherded bombers became the blunt instrument that unstitched the enemy day one, road, one bridge, one column at a time. War on the ground runs on schedules. Columns must start at first light. Bridges must take weight on the hour. Fuel must arrive before the next bound. The Thunderbolt turned every clock into a liar. Find the column, hit the head, hit the tail. Leave the middle trapped in smoke. Now, every minute stretches. Radios shout. Engines idle. Officers walk the ditch line and search for a way around a crater that was not there 10 minutes ago. One stalled half-track blocks a town gate. One bomb turns that choke point into a furnace. Movement, the core promise of armour, becomes a question. The Jug punished the soft parts that make steel move. Ammunition trucks, fuel lorries, bridge repair kits, track carriers. A pass from 850 caliber guns, ripped canvas and radiator cores lit, siphoned fuel, shredded tires. Tanks could take more. Crews knew it. So the fighters brought what armor feared most, bombs and rockets from angles that made a driver clench. Tracks popped. Road wheels twisted. One hit at the wrong bend pinned an entire column to a road, while more Thunderbolts came in on the clock. Rail mattered as much as asphalt. You did not need to sink a locomotive to break a division's day. You only needed to halt one at a junction with a string of flat cars, then put holes into the switchwork and the yard tower. Cars stacked. A morning timetable decayed into a guessing game. Artillery shells that were meant to reach the front before dusk sat cold in a siding with chalk marks bleeding in the rain. Bridges were nerves. Cut one, and you did not only stop traffic, you forced a rewrite of the plan under pressure. A pair of 500-pound bombs dropped tight on an approach span did not always drop the span. It did not matter. Holes in the deck, shrapnel in the stringers, a cracked abutment did enough. Engineers came up in haste. Thunderbolts orbited and waited for the first truck to test the repair. Another run. Another delay. Daylight poured away while headquarters redrew arrows on a map. Flak was the price. Air at treetop could turn into a wire cage of tracer and smoke. Gunners hid guns under trees, baited with a single burst, held fire until a fighter rolled wings level in a shallow pullout. The jug paid in holes and bent panels. Crews paid with hands that shook in the refuel pit. Yet the airplane tolerated damage, and ground teams turned battered airframes quickly. Survivability became friction. Friction multiplied across days bled tempo from armored core that lived or died by tempo. Morale was the logistics of the mind. A driver who had seen a pair of Thunderbolts reduce a lead company to scrap moved slower at the next crossroads. A battalion staff that had watched its last bridge repair cut in half by a diving fighter grew cautious with fuel allocations. Caution spread downward in whispers and upward in delays. A division commander who feared air attack massed later or not at all because the sky was fickle and anger from above arrived faster than orders from the rear. Reports from the other side admitted it in dry language. Day movements disrupted, assembly incomplete, timetables slipped, cold words for hot hours. Men face down in ditches while 8 guns walked fire down a road. Crews wrestling a tow bar onto a tank while another flight formed overhead, pontoons twisting in current under whistle and blast. Even when losses were not total, the certainty of interruption did the deeper work. Armor wanted momentum. The jug sold doubt. Air and ground learned to speak a shared language. Panels in fields. Controllers on jeeps near the line. A call went out. Within minutes a pair was overhead, sliding down a sun line toward a junction that had mattered 15 minutes before. Not every strike hit steel. Many hits carved fear. A pilot dropped short on a hedgerow. The second pass was noise and dust. The column halted all the same because the road ahead had become mystery, and mystery is a weapon. Weather tried to blind the sky war. Low cloud, freezing haze, sudden snow that turned valleys into tunnels. The method survived. Flights waited on ladders of altitude for breaks. When a slit opened, they drove through in knives of sunlight and made a single savaged minute count. A stalled vehicle, a bridge half mended, a crossroads already nervous. One strike at the right moment made an entire afternoon useless for a regiment. The Thunderbolt did not win battles by itself. No airplane did. It did something more patient and more corrosive. It stole hours. It split columns. It made commanders lie to themselves about how fast they could move under a sky that might tear open at any time. Metal suffered. Morale sagged. Movement, the one thing armor was supposed to guarantee, became the first casualty. This is how reputations become tools. Crews on both sides adjusted to what they believed would happen when that round nose appeared over the tree line. Belief shifted choices. Choices shifted outcomes. A fighter that did not die easily became a habit the enemy could not break. Check the sky. Slow the march. Hope the next bridge lasts until dark. Know that the odds grow worse if daylight holds. The runway is quiet now. Only wind moving across pierced steel mat, only the soft tick of cooling metal. A Thunderbolt sits with patched skin and fresh belts in its bays. A hand along the rivet line finds a record of impacts. The lesson begins at the touch. Survivability is not romance. It is a design choice that keeps a pilot alive long enough to act again. The Thunderbolt wrote that lesson in daylight at treetop and at cloudtop under flak and inside cones of cannon fire. Crews trusted it because it earned trust in minutes that should have ended men. That trust changed behavior. How low pilots dared to go, how long they stayed on target, how calmly they dragged wounded machines back to friendly fields. Confidence is a weapon. The Thunderbolt manufactured it. The other side carried a different inheritance. Drivers learned to scatter at the sound. Staffs learned that schedules bent to luck more than to plan. Pilots learned not to assume that one pass would finish a Thunderbolt. Memory altered tactics. Altered tactics reshaped fights. Even after the last P-47 left European skies, that memory stayed in doctrine. Never count on a single strike to erase a rugged opponent. Never mass where a survivable attacker can reach you. Never draft a timetable that cannot afford sudden minutes of chaos. The philosophy endured. Build an airplane that can be hurt and still work. Protect the human first. Separate critical systems. Route lines where fragments do the least harm. Use a power plant that does not bleed to death from a pinhole. Layer redundancy so damage produces degraded performance, not instant loss. Forms change, jets replace pistons, composites replace thick aluminum, but the spine of the idea remains. Airframes that soldiers trust inherit the Thunderbolt's priorities. Armor where it matters. Systems that limp rather than die. Structure that forgives rough landings and rougher days. Maintenance crews remember it in a different light. The Thunderbolt made sense under a flood lamp. Panels came off, lines could be reached, a shot cylinder could be swapped without turning the airplane into a puzzle. Turn time fell because the machine had been built by people who imagined damage and designed the repair path into the bones. That logic still pays. Every quick fix under pressure begins in a drawing room where someone asked what happens when this is full of holes and needed at dawn. Culture wrapped itself around the sound. A field still hushes when a clean Thunderbolt starts, and the Pratt Whitney R-2800 rolls into a physical thunder that climbs into the chest. Veterans step closer. Younger aircrew lean forward. They are not hearing nostalgia. They are hearing a thesis. Mass power protection combined to buy time in a place that offers none. A machine can be honest about its job and still be beautiful for the way it refuses to quit. There is another reason the Thunderbolt matters. It made strategy tactile. Interdiction, tempo, operational pause, hard, abstract terms turned literal when 8 heavy guns walked fire down a road and a bridge repair halted at the swing of a wrist. The airplane gave commanders a tool that stole hours instead of only counting kills. That is a wider frame for air power. Not glamour in the clouds, but pressure on the map applied every daylight minute a strip can launch. Modern planners still chase that rhythm. Find where the enemy keeps time. Take it. Keep taking it until choices shrink. Legends distort. The Thunderbolt does not need help. It does not require claims that it won campaigns by itself or made other airplanes obsolete. It did what it was built to do and kept doing it when damaged. That is enough. The record is not one miracle story or one ace's line. It is a long ledger of sorties that brought pilots to breakfast when other machines would have left families to telegrams. The men who strapped in felt that truth through the seat and through the stick. The men who faced it felt it in their nerves. Stand at the end of a strip in cold air and watch one lift away. Wheels tuck, nose tips. The big fighter climbs into thin light with a steadiness that feels like a promise. You see why crews loved it. Not because it was pretty, because it was faithful. Because it let a human being push into harm and still believe in seeing evening. The war ended. The idea did not. Every time a designer thickens, a bulkhead moves a line, adds an emergency mode, and keeps a cockpit alive behind glass and plate, the old round nose nods. Every time a pilot drags a wounded airplane home on partial power, every time ground crew rivet a patch and send it back up before lunch, the echo carries. No slogans. No myth-making, only a fact that refuses to fade. If survival is the hinge on which missions turn, then the airplane that endures is the airplane that matters. The Thunderbolt proved it day after day, hole after hole, minute after stolen minute. It still lives in the hands that touch aluminum and in the minds that plan tomorrow's fights.